one of the most significant reforms to South Africa's public service since 1994 is now being implemented, with the aim of making government more professional and less political. Good morning. This is the BizNews Daybreak. I'm Asimenite. Coming up, the latest from the global markets, what the Public Service Amendment Act could mean for accountability and service delivery, insights from the BizNews portfolio on discipline and long-term value. We begin with the global picture. There's been the usual movement overnight across global markets. First up, our partners at Bloomberg give us the latest overnight world news.
After the bell, Tesla reported first quarter profit above estimates. These results may be an encouraging sign since Tesla reported sluggish vehicle sales in Q1, but later on a call with analysts, Tesla said it sees CapEx spending this year above $25 billion. Now, the previous guidance was a little over $20 billion. Here is Bloomberg's Dana Hull.
Tesla is going to spend big this year on AI compute, on the Terafab, on their Terafab factory. They also announced that they're going to have to fix a lot of cars. Cars that have the hardware 3 are not really capable of FSD unsupervised. So there's going to be a lot of spending, and that figure, I think, has investors a little worried.
That was Bloomberg's Dana Hull. Shares in Tesla were down 2% in late U.S. trading. IBM posted quarterly sales in its software unit that were in line with estimates. Software revenue increased 11% to a little more than $7 billion. Still, there are concerns about AI disrupting IBM's business. Shares in IBM were down 6% in late U.S. trading. And Texas Instruments gave a strong forecast for the current quarter, helped in part by booming spending on AI data centers. Shares in Texas Instruments are up 10% in late U.S. trading. Yesterday, President Trump extended a ceasefire in the Iran war that was due to expire today. And today, there were confusing signals from the president. Trump told Fox News the ceasefire extension was for 3 to 5 days, but later, the White House refuted those claims. Here is Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
I'm not going to set a timetable for the president. He has not done that, and I won't. I know there's been some anonymous sourced reporting that there was maybe a 3 to 5 day deadline. That is not true. The president has not set a deadline himself. Ultimately, he will dictate the timetable.
Now, we know the U.S. and Iran are locked in a battle for control over the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier today, Iran attacked 3 ships near the critical waterway. Gunboats fired on commercial vessels, with a cargo ship and a container vessel coming under fire. And at the same time, the U.S. is maintaining its naval blockade on ships going into and out of Iranian ports. Now, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called the move a violation of the ceasefire, and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said the blockade and threats are main obstacles to diplomacy. We got reaction from Wayne Sanders. He is Senior Defense Research Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.
Right now, both the United States as well as Iran are looking at how can I operate militarily in order to still gain leverage in the region during this type of negotiation, right? And so they've pretty much just restricted it down to the Straits of Hormuz.
Meantime, the Pentagon says it will take 6 months to fully clear the Strait of Hormuz of Iranian mines. The Washington Post reports the Defense Department informed Congress that any such operation is unlikely to be carried out until after the war is over. U.S. Navy Secretary John Phelan is stepping down effective immediately. The Defense Department gave no reason for this decision. However, the Wall Street Journal reports Phelan's departure comes after months of simmering tension with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Now, the U.S. Navy is currently helping to oversee the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, one of its biggest operations in decades.
Back home, a potentially important shift in how government operates. DA spokesperson Jan de Villiers explains the Public Service Amendment Act, which has now been signed into law. At its core, the legislation is about building a more professional, merit-based public service, limiting political influence over appointments, and strengthening the independence of senior officials. The thinking is fairly straightforward. Without a capable and independent administration, policy doesn't really matter because it can't be implemented properly. Here's that conversation.
One of the reasons why I'm really happy about it is what what the DA has always been advocating for, and what has actually been captured in the Government of National Unity's statement of intent, is that we should work towards a public service that is professional and merit-based. And what that really means is that the public service is everybody, or often called the civil service. It is everybody that works for government. It's roughly 1.2 million people. Obviously, government's the biggest employer in the country. And they everybody that's earning a tax-paid salary is part of the public service and administration, as we call it. And what the DA has been saying is that when you do state capture, and this is what we've seen in the previous 10 years, the most important thing for you to capture is obviously the administration, the public servants, because if you can control the director generals, the heads of department, and senior managers, then obviously that's where corruption happens. That's where you can manipulate supply chain management and get your people who grease your palms to do your deals. And how you stop that is by following a model. Singapore is very famous for it, but it's in a lot of countries where you say, listen, the public service, the people that are working for government, they should be professionals, they should be based on merit, and they should have no political affiliation. And this piece of legislation makes it much, much tougher for any government official, or civil servant, or member of the public service to be politically affiliated and be active in politics, and also be part of the government's civil service. So there's a strengthening of that role. Another more important thing is there's also a strengthening of the independence of director generals to employ within their departments and also get employed. So it used to be the case that a minister could recommend their own director general, which is the most important official in any department. It's the top of the pyramid. He or she could appoint any person without a selection panel or without inputs, which obviously makes cadre deployment and building patronage networks really easy, because if you as they say, the fish rots from the head. So if you can get someone corrupt at the top, and I must say that's it doesn't even need to be someone corrupt. If it's just someone who's not there based on merit, based on independence, but because of party loyalty, then the result can only always be state capture and corruption and a non-functioning government service. And why I'm so passionate about the public service hierarchy is that, at the end of the day, we need to do a whole host of things. We need to grow the economy, have better fiscal policy. We need to remove red tape, fix hospitals, fix the police. I mean, there's a whole long list, a well-known list of things which we need to do. But you can't do any of that. Not a single one of it you can achieve if you don't have a professional, merit-based public service. People working in government who are independent and not politically affiliated, who can actually roll out those policies and execute on that which the political heads want them to do.
From policy to markets. In the latest Boardroom talk, BizNews editor Ali Cog takes a closer look at three major holdings: Capitec, Chub, and Remgro. Each tells a slightly different story, but the common thread is discipline. Capitec continues to grow and evolve its model. Chub is sticking to strict underwriting principles, and Remgro is focusing on capital allocation after exiting FirstRand. It's a useful reminder that over time, management decisions tend to matter more than headlines. Here's Ali Cog.
So here's a set of numbers that I've really been waiting for. The banking phenomenon that is Capitec, for two reasons. Tsepo Malelwe, who you may know is the only outside shareholder, small shareholder, but an outside shareholder in BizNews, is the man behind Lebashe. And Lebashe in the past week announced that it has reduced its shareholding in Capitec. I spoke to Tsepo and he explained that this was to do with the derivative structures that tend to always accompany these kind of large shareholdings. And it sounded, he didn't go into a lot of detail, but he did say, and then issued a statement actually afterwards to say that Lebaucher has lost none of its huge confidence in Capitec, and the sale from down from about 7% to just under 4% in the equity that it holds of Capitec is not a reflection on the management. So that's good. That's part one. Part two, I was waiting for this as well because Gerrie Fourie, the longtime chief executive of Capitec, is now out of the picture, and we have a new team that's taken over. So it would be, I suppose, instructive to see whether there have been some strategic moves on that side. I hear, and I'm not sure how strongly we can take this, but I hear that Capitec is lining up to take on the UK market. So let's cross the Atlantic now and have a look at Chub. Evan Greenberg's global insurance titan last night reported its first quarter results for 2026. And quite frankly, the operating performance here is staggering. I was put onto Chub through Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company. And if you consider that the biggest part of Berkshire Hathaway is their reinsurance business, and that Warren just loved that side of the business, if anybody knows insurance and where the best buys are in insurance, well, it would be Berkshire Hathaway. So Chubb's a big one in their portfolio, a stock that they've been buying, and that was good enough for me. Detailed in their first quarter release from Chub was the reporting of core operating income of $2.69 billion US. Makes our guys look tiny, doesn't it? You multiply that by 16, and that's up 80% in the year. Well, compared with the first quarter of last year, 80% core operating income. That's the number that these companies look at. The property and casualty combined ratio came in at an exceptional 84%. Their consolidated net premiums hit $14 billion in the quarter, dollars that is, and that was up by nearly 11%. Those are big numbers when you're in a low inflation environment. And furthermore, the pre-tax net investment income was a record $1.7 billion. So you've got your underwriting profit on the one side, but this pre-tax net investment income, in other words, the money, the float that came in, they made a record $1.7 billion from that investment income in the quarter. It's not all sunshine, though, as we've noted on biznews.com earlier this week. Global geopolitics and market cycles are tricky beasts. Even Greenberg himself warns that war in the Middle East raises a specter of higher inflation and slower economic growth. Well, finally, for this episode of Boardroom Talk, where we have a look at stocks in our portfolio in the news, let's bring it back to South Africa and have a closer look at Remgro. There's been a flurry of announcements recently regarding Remgro's final exit from FirstRand. And according to Sen's announcements issued today, and that followed up from one on the 11th of March, Remgro has now completely disposed of its remaining shareholding in FirstRand. Between early February and March the 10th, they sold just under 52 million FirstRand shares on the open market. That's through the JSE. Anyone could have bought them. It would have put a bit of a dampener on the FirstRand share price as well. And that was an aggregate consideration there of just under 5 billion rand. And subsequent to that, they sold the absolute final tranche of nearly 40 million shares for another 3.5 billion rand. So it's out. Now, this is a really interesting story. I recall right back in the beginning when Remgro decided to invest in FirstRand in the first place. And that was when it was established with Laurie Dippenaar, G.T. Ferreira, and Paul Harris, and they were building it up. And Remgro traded in its mining portfolio, which was a very good idea at the time, for financial services. So they became a big shareholder in FirstRand, and that's going back decades. But to understand why they've changed their minds, we need context. Remgro, which is the Rupert family's investment holding company, acquired the direct stake in FirstRand back in June 2020, following the unbundling of its interest in RMB Holdings, which is where the original investment was made. So RMB Holdings unbundled. So RMB Holdings was put together by Laurie, GT, and Paul. And RMB, Rand Merchant Bank, as it first was at the time, was created by Johann Rupert. He'd come back from the United States, where he'd worked at Lazard, which was a top investment stroke merchant bank there. And he started his own merchant bank in South Africa called Rand Merchant Bank. And that developed into RMB, and then RMB was put into the whole FirstRand group, and RMB Holdings was the holding company. And they were happily going along there, creating operations like Discovery and so on. But then in June 2020, after the departure of the founders of FirstRand, or the last of them, the decision was that they would then unbundle RMB Holdings, and the FirstRand shares in RMB Holdings, which was by far its largest constituent, were then given to the different areas, and then Remgro has now sold it down from after announcing back then, that's 6 years ago, that FirstRand was labeled as a non-core holding, and by June last year they'd sold that down from about 4% of the equity to 1.5%, and now they've just liquidated the rest.
And that's the BizNews Daybreak for this morning. I'm Asimenite. Thanks for listening. We'll keep you updated as the day develops. Cheers.